Want even more CEDH content? Commander's Herald has got you covered. It's the best resource for CEDH articles out there, written by experts, including Playing with Power's own Treg Sasser. Check out the latest Phyrexia All Will Be One set reviews now. Go to commandersherald.com today to read more.
I want you to follow my example of how I used to be and not how I am, because right now I don't really prepare for my tournaments much anymore.
Hey, I'm Cal, and you're listening to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. Today, I'm joined by Ian, better known as ComedIan MTG, the winner of Playing with Power's very own Mox Masters 1 tournament, or Mox Masters October. We haven't really nailed down that branding yet. The marketing guy, me, really needs to get on that, I guess. It was very nice of Ian to join me for a few minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and play that interview for you here in a second. But first, I wanted to talk quickly about our sponsors. TC's Rockets has one of the largest selections of toys, comics, and games in San Diego. With thousands of Magic the Gathering cards being added to their online store every morning, you never know what deals you'll find at tcsrockets.com. You can also keep up with the games by tuning into their Twitch streams every Tuesday and Friday for live paper Magic. Fuel up and check out TC's Rockets today. Are you looking to pick up some fun CDH merch that also supports our channel? Check out our store. We have a few different clothing designs and even Dragon Shield Playing with Power logo sleeves. Check out the podcast description for more information. And now, without further ado, let's jump into this interview with the illustrious ComedIan MTG. Ian, thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you here. Mr. Champion of Mox Masters 1 finally took one down. Ian, I definitely know you very well. I'm sure plenty of people listening know you very well, but maybe if there's people who don't know you very well, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So ironically, this is like my return to this podcast. As at one point, for those long-term listeners may know, I co-hosted, that's a fun word. I co-hosted this with Ryan some years ago for, I think, like 6 or 7 episodes, until I was like, oh, hey, jobs are tough.
I have a life outside of Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, a little bit. But yeah, you can find me, Ian, on youtube.com/ComedIanMTG, where I think as far as channels that are specifically focused on tournament EDH, I am the largest one, ? But if you want to top 4 breakdowns of CEDH tournaments, going through metagames, I'm currently going through a CEDH tier list for every single color combination. So there's a lot of stuff in the works. For those who don't know, my sort of initial claim to fame is the Winota primer, which is the OG Winota list, which is getting something like 170,000 views at this point, which blows my mind. But yeah, that's that list is quite popular. That was my big number. But even before that, I was the author of Atomic Thrasios. I played a bunch of different decks throughout this. I was one of the first people on the collaborative Rog Silas primer that I don't think ever actually got submitted to the DDB after like dozens of hours of us all working on it. But I've been in the space a lot. I was kind of started things off as a brewer and then kept playing tournaments, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm a tournament grinder now, and that's kind of been my niche for the past, I don't know, almost 2 years now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what is it about tournament CEDH that draws you to it? I know that you're one of the few people I know who will pretty much, if there's a CEDH tournament, if you don't have some kind of pressing commitment, you will be there. It's like you and the Into the North guys.
Basically,
what is it that draws you to it so much?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, as soon as I picked up Magic cards, my friend did that sort of like supportive, condescending thing where they were like, "You're definitely an EDH player," and I was like, "All right." I had this like 100 card pile that was like a mill pile, and it was kind of off the top, and so I've always had that sort of, I guess, you want 1,000 things to be moving at the same time thing. And some people could diagnose that as a symptom of ADHD. But that's kind of always been my thing. So I've been really a fan of like the inherent synergy of Commander. just the idea that like you have your commander and it is this option that you have at all times. And that's been something pretty unique. So the thing that has kept me in EDH, and I guess so, how I got into CEDH was I was at a local store where Braden, who eventually I would go on to do the CEDH cast with, had started playing there. And before I even knew Braden, I just knew Braden as the spike at the store who I built Fibblethip to laugh when I beat them. But I had a friend who was playing this like Nagila list that was like 2 cards off the primer, but they had like sort of naturally built it. They had like started as a casual list and they were like, oh, I can optimize it. And then would crush all of these pods, and I was the only one who could ever like keep up with what they were doing and like evaluate the board effectively. And they were like, hey, you should try CEDH out. I was like, okay. I'd already kind of heard about it a little bit. There were some people at a different store who had been playing like really high power stuff, and I was like, seems like a natural transition. I like good cards. And then tournament CEDH started out as like I liked doing brews, and it was my like really cool place to like test these brews out. And the tournaments for me were always like the really exciting place where you get to like go and use these experiments. Cause I started out once again playing 60 card Magic. I went to GPs and SCGs and all of those things. So like, that's where you tested your decks. And then I started doing tournaments for CDH and realized like the nuance of table politics and all of these things. Like it was just so cool and so unique, and the ability to, even if your cards don't line up the right way, but you can use your words and your ideas and your natural knowledge of the game. Like variance is significantly reduced in a sense when you play CEDH. Don't get me wrong, it's a variance full format, right? It's 400 unique piles of cards that are all, singleton, but you can also like, if you're utilizing your skills and your tools correctly, you can reduce the amount of variance in the game just by talking to the table, being a human being, being social. And then there was this aspect of identity in EDH and CEDH, which is like you have these decks that you enjoy and you play them a bunch because they speak to you and their play patterns speak to you. So there's a lot of different reasons why, but in the end, things with every other TCG I've played with Magic, all of them, eventually the meta gets stale. And for CEDH, I think that is a logical fallacy. I think it is
not much of a meta.
Right. Well, even like, so if there was a CEDH tournament every single week, I guarantee there would still not be a solved meta unless people really start drinking the Kool-Aid. And by that I mean there have been times in our format where people have been playing all of the same deck because they listen to 1 or 2 people who say it's the best deck.
Flash or what have you.
Right. Now, often. Flash was definitely
the classic example.
Right. Flash was a classic example. But even then, I went to multiple tournaments and was playing in multiple pods where the best deck would get its butt handed to them because people teched against it. And because of the fact that it's a multiplayer format. Now, did you have an inherent ability to perform very, very well playing Flash? Absolutely you did. But that doesn't mean it was the only thing to do. So even at a point in where there was like inherently one thing way stronger than everything else, you could still show up with a different deck and perform. Now that CEDH has passed the Flash period, we have this ad nause thing, which for a while people were like, oh God, it's Flash all over again. But then we started having this rock, paper, scissors of like, well, ad nause is good against the mid-range your decks, but the mid-range decks are good against the stacks decks, and the stacks decks are good against the ad nause decks, which creates this like absolute intense rotation of the format. And the fact that if someone shows up with a weird deck in your pod, it's a completely new meta. Every single pod is a completely new meta, and it really just depends on where you're playing.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. Especially the tournament meta. I would love to see if we could ever formulate a tournament meta, but for a lot of the reasons that you said, I'm not sure that will ever happen if it ever does. And speaking of tournaments and maybe even tournament metas or bringing cool new things to tournaments, buried the lead a little bit here. Yeah. Yes, Ian, you just won the first ever Mox Masters tournament, the new Playing with Power tournament series. Obviously, you are well known as a consistent performer in CEDH tournaments. In addition to being a grinder, you have plenty of top 16s and top 4s to your name, but never quite a top finish. How did it feel to land one?
Cathartic for sure. And it was one of those bittersweet things because it was like I had to really play the political game in that last pod. And I am someone who is like and this may come as a point of failure at some point in my CEDH career, and it probably has already, but I'm very honor bound when it comes to CEDH, right? So if I make a deal with somebody and I feel like I have misled them like more explicitly than I would like to, I will feel like crappy about it. So there was like, I was really playing the game in that last pot. I was really like flirting with the line of like, what can I say here that is legitimately 100%? I am not going to feel like scummy for like doing this. You know what I mean? And so like I had to really play all my resources in that game. Like keeping that Teferi alive, for those who ended up seeing that game, was integral to me winning this game, because my time sieve combos were basically off because there was only 3 people left in the pod. And my Thassa's Oracle stuff, I had like none of the pieces for. We had basically a single turn to get out from underneath Gustav's stack. So like keeping that Teferi around was so important to my game, and I had to sweat it out. I had to really work to make that politic happening. And it was very intense up until the very last moment. But it really felt very vindicating. It's very frustrating to have people like say really positive things about you as a player, but not be able to say like, I've won a tournament. Like, that sucks. So yeah, it was a lot of hard work finally put to the test. Because as you mentioned, like I had 2 top 16s in a row where I'm eliminated by one of my best friends in the community, Charles, the mono white guy, in the top 16, with basically ending in a 1v1. 2 tournaments in a row. I've had at least 2 top 4s at this rate, a couple of other top 16s in other tournaments, and just consistent top finishes without ever being able to get there. And I think I literally joked earlier that day. Someone was like, oh, we'll see who wins this today. And I go, well, knowing me, I'm going to have an undefeated record in the Swiss top 16 and scrub out.
And then, just be first person out of the entire top 16
every time. Like there was that Marchesa event where we cut to the top 64, and I was like, I ended the first day in 3rd place in Swiss, and then I lost in the quarterfinals, and I was like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yep, that'll just get you. That'll just get you sometimes. But speaking of politics and whatnot, very on theme for the commander you brought.
Yeah.
Tivit, is that how it's pronounced? Tivit, Seller of Secrets. Really quickly, for those of you who don't know, Tivit, Seller of Secrets is a 6-drop Esper Sphinx Rogue. It has flying and ward 3, and then Council's Dilemma. That's not a mechanic you've heard of in a very long time. Whenever Tivit enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player, starting with you, each player votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, investigate, so make a clue token. And then for each bribery vote, create a treasure token. And then, most importantly, when voting, you may vote an additional time. This thing is a 6/6. That's a big old beater. What is it about Tivit, Seller of Secrets, Ian, that makes for an intriguing CEDH deck?
Yeah, so it's a weird one for sure. I didn't love Tivit when it was first spoiled. I was like, oh, cool. Like, it's a time sieve combo. People are like, burp, burp, time sieve. Ha ha ha. And I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And then like 2 months later, Battle for Baldur's Gate came out. And I was like, hey, that Displacer Kitten card is real damn good with Tivit. Every time you cast a non-creature spell, because your opponents, when you have that combo going, will never give you a treasure, ever. But at minimum, making 3 clues and 2 treasures every time you cast a non-creature spell is pretty good. So I was like, okay, here's like this quasi stormish thing you can do with your commander, like sort of an inevitability engine. And then I was like, okay, I didn't love Tivit until I saw it at a local event, because I was playing Winota during this tournament, and the top 16 of that event, I played against another Tivit deck, and realizing how impactful Ward 3 is on that card completely changed my opinion of it. Because I played a lot of Paco and Halden, right? So I'm used to having my big creature just absolutely get blown out for being too scary, right? Because it's very similar to Paco in the sense it's like the big creature that provides you your card advantage. Now in Paco and Halden, you have your Halden as your backup, and that allows you to keep casting your spells, right? And in Tivit, you have Ward 3 that basically says, sure, you can remove Tivit, but it's going to be a hefty investment. It's really hard for like the turbo players to just like hold up 4 mana for a Swords to Plowshares. And as I mentioned, I just recorded a video that released like right before we're recording this, in which I mentioned like that your opponents never want to bounce Tivit. Bouncing Tivit feels awful because you just recast it the next turn and you still get the enter the battlefield trigger with it. Like, even if you, especially if you're doing the time Steve combo, like they bounce time Steve, oh no, it's 2 mana, and you've already had priority, so you can take another turn. Or they bounce Tivit, which you just play the next turn and then sacrifice all the treasures anyways.
Yeah, and they are paying like a minimum of 4 mana to bounce.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds
right.
horrible.
I was like, yeah, 5 mana Alchemist Retrieval does not feel great. Oh man. But yeah, it's stuff like that. So it's like Ward 3 is real. And so I had kind of another thing in that match that I saw was like I watched that opponent do like turn 1 Mana Vault and 1 other Mana Rock, and then like play a Smothering Tide to get out their turn 2 Tivit or something cracked like that. And I was like, oh, Tivit when it comes out really early, like absolutely controls the board. So that was my first impression of it. And then I saw the Displacer Kit and stuff, and I was like, that's pretty cool. That gives the deck a lot more momentum. And then I thought, after Killstars went almost undefeated at one of the Chaos events playing Kitten combo in his blue farm deck, I was like, okay, this deck I think plays the Kitten combo with Teferi a lot cleaner than that deck did. So I'm like, okay, here's already a combo in the deck. Then you have your Time Sieve combo, which having a 1-card combo in a black deck where you can tutor it immediately, and also it's an artifact, so your blue tutors put it right on the battlefield. I was like, okay, that's actually pretty cool that you just kind of win pretty easily if this combo happens. And then I was like, also you get Fastest Oracle. Like,
yeah, just the normal Fastest Oracle stuff also just fits cleanly in. Yeah.
Turns out still pretty good. But then I started playing it and I was like, oh, this is the first deck I've played in a really long time where it felt like the deck was appropriately an extension of my player. So like I, as a player, play to a certain pattern that I will play the best at. And the reason I think I was able to not lose a single game during this tournament was because the deck rewarded how I played the game. Like when I try to play a Turbo Adnaz deck, it's so weird because I'll like hold up interaction in Rograk Timna, and they're like, the deck's never going to pay me off for doing that, right? But in Tivit, I can play turn 1 Esper Sentinel, turn 2 Counterbalance, and the deck will go, yes, this is you, Ian. This is what you want to do. And I'll go, thank you, deck. Yes, it is what I want to do.
Yeah, you simply want to get to combat on your next turn and make 3 more clues, so
exactly.
You can draw 2 cards. Oh,
yeah. And the question I've been getting a lot since this tournament is like, how do you deal with the fact that you have a 6-mana commander? And it's like, there have been some games where it turns out, hear me out, you can still play Esper without a commander and still do really fine. Like that curve I mentioned earlier of Esper Sentinel and the Counterbalance into like a 2-mana Mana Rock holding up counter spells is like, your opponents aren't doing anything. You will eventually just hard cast Tivit and then just turn the corner in the game. So yeah, Tivit definitely, it doesn't have to be cast early, but when it is cast early, my God, your opponents are like, how?
Yeah, and from what I can see of your list, you're of the free spells from Commander 19, you're only playing Fierce Guardianship. You're not on Deadly Rollick. Obviously, you're not playing Deflecting Swat, so that definitely makes it a little bit less punishing to not immediately have your commander out.
Yeah, and like, you know, Fierce Guardianship feels still pretty free because, as I said, this deck is like a mid-range Esper deck, so you can still like do the Fierce Guardianship thing. But like the times when you do get out your turn 2, turn 3 Tivit, you're super happy to have that free spell like all the time.
Turns out Jeweled Lotus is a cracked Magic card. Write that down, everybody. Put that down in your notes for today's episode. Jeweled Lotus is cracked.
Yeah, and we've been doing the Mana Vault thing for like years, and I feel like people are like, yeah, it's always Jeweled Lotus. It's like, Mana Vault still does the thing exactly that I need it to do. Still a busted card, and also doesn't have a limitation to only cast the commander. Like, card's pretty good.
Mana Vault's pretty decent, I've heard. You said you were, obviously you've been jamming games to this. That's how you figured out you liked it and that kind of stuff. Was there any kind of specific tournament prep you did in the run up to Mox Masters or anything like that?
So I'm such a bad example at this point in my career because I don't know how to say this, but like,
he's just too good, ladies and gentlemen. Write that one down too, everybody.
But I put in my 10,000 hours already for CEDH, right? The games that I played before this tournament with Tivit was I played an older version for like 6 games on Moxfield Playtester without significant changes to this deck. So I made those adjustments and I brought it to a local 20-person tournament the weekend beforehand. And at that local tournament, I played it. It was literally, I had planned to play Marnius Calgar, and I was like, oh, well, I have all the pieces for Tivit, and I've kind of wanted to play Displacer Kitten for a while, so like, I'll play Tivit instead. And I played it, and I described that feeling earlier of like, this deck felt like an extension of me that I really wanted it. And I was like, oh, this deck might be really good. And then, so that was like 5 games beforehand, a local tournament, and then I played at Mox Masters. But as I said, like with CEDH, if you put in that early investment, I was lucky enough to be in a situation during COVID where I could really focus on like creating content for CEDH and playing games and doing that stuff. And so nowadays, I mostly play in tournaments. Like the catch a game with your friends online thing is not something I do a lot. So it's a little weird because people like ask me about my prep process, and I'm like, I watch some content from people I respect and whose opinions I respect, and then I play games with people mostly during tournaments because that's how I prepare for a tournament meta, is just playing tournaments. And then I kind of go from there. And yeah, and just keep my mind open too. Like, would I have ever said like Tivit feels like an insane AES tier commander? Probably not, but like having the deck in my hands, I'm kind of like, what did I do right here?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So obviously you figured out that you had liked the deck kind of a little bit beforehand, kind of almost on a whim. You're like, hey, I want to play it. Why
not? That's my process.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, hey, it's a deck. Hey, mamma mia. Exactly that shitty Italian accent. And then the day came. How would you say the tournament went? How did the tournament feel? You had a pretty great Swiss record, right?
Yeah, probably my best. No. Close to my best record ever in a Swiss event. I went 4-1 with Rog Silas when I top forward Marquesa a couple years ago. But that was like 4-0 before I played that last round because Spleen was putting pressure on my my win record. But I mean, so, like, to not lose a game for an entire tournament feels pretty good. So it's really funny because I was going through this. I was watching this anime. This. I swear this is relevant.
Oh no!
I was watching this anime on Netflix, and it was really good. And I was like really into it. And I was like, oh man, I got to go play this tournament right now. And then my only natural draw of the day was the first round, and it was this playing with amazing people. I played with people I really enjoyed. It was Ara, who I played in the top 16 of Pun City, and just I've known through live events and a bunch of different people. Amazing person to play with. But it was a long, grueling match. Like, it was a lot. And I was very close to winning if we had another round of turn cycles, but like, it's hard to say what would happen. But it felt like I had a very good position there. And that round ended, and I had just barely any time, and I was like, I could just drop and watch this anime right now. That thought going through my head, and I was like, Ian, don't do this thing. Like, you can't do this thing right now. Go play the Magic game. Like, you want to. You're just being lazy. Because I think I don't know if anyone else who like, I have like major intense fight or flight reactions in my brain. Like, my brain goes like, oh god, I have to perform at a level. Oh man, I'm gonna explode and die. So with that first round, I was just like, I could just sit at home and relax and watch this really cool anime and not have to play this tournament.
Rather than grinding out CEDH games on your grindy CEDH deck all day long.
Exactly. And then I was like, stop that. I won round 2, and I was like, 101 feels pretty hot. Not gonna lie, feeling pretty good about myself. Played the next game, felt pretty solid again, and I was able to get there. And I think that was round 3 where I won with time sieve with a finite number of turns because one of the players had died, and I had to go like up clues, down clues, up clues, down clues, only making 4 every time I did damage, and won with exactly 1 turn remaining in turns because I had taken all of the turns and the extra turn cycle and after time. And I was like, all right, I'm running pretty hot. And then the round after that, very tough game, ended up getting there. So I'm 3 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw. And at that point, the Eminence Gaming's software tends to pair people by record, much like a traditional Magic Swiss event. I don't know the exact details of it, but its relative records will be facing against each other as the rounds go on, because you want to, have these challenging breakers. It rewards people for blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. But that's how the whole shebang works. So when you're going through that process, there becomes a point in the last round where if you're doing well enough, for example, I had 16 points at the time, right? Because it's 5 points for every win, 1 point for every draw. And 16 points was like definitely in. And I was like, I would love a mental health break right now. And then I get paired with 3 people I know and they ping me and they go, Ian, get in here. It's a draw. And I was like, great. So it felt good. So I basically played 4 rounds of Swiss, but going 3-0 for the matches I won, and then 1 draw that felt like, had we not run out of time, I felt in a really solid position. So obviously going into the semis, I was feeling good, but it's also that wild break for like you miss basically a 2-hour chunk of Swiss, and then you're like, and go to the semifinals.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And
yeah,
that probably would have been a pretty crazy pod. The round 5, it was like you, Takato, Goose, and Tony, Hokie. I think for that final pod.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been a pretty crazy pod. I saw that one. Yeah. I was like, ooh, that's going to be spicy. And then Mikey was like, they true. I'm like, yeah, makes sense. They all have the best records by far.
Yeah. Well, that and the other thing is like, one of the big advantages of doing that, even if you're not playing against friends, is like you want to be able to save your information for the semis, right? You don't want to like show your hand right before you go to play these people for a game with even more stakes. Right? Like the only thing we were playing for there, quote, would be turn order in the Swiss. Yeah, but Gustav and I both knew we were gonna be in the top 3 or 4 people anyway. So we were like, yeah, let's
yeah, so you're already gonna be first or second seat at pod 1 through 4.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are the semifinals and finals? How did they feel?
Whew, they were tough. The semis was easier than the finals, and I don't say that to reflect anything on my semifinals opponents. It was just more so I was going first seat. My deck performed very well. I was able to open a Grafdigger's Cage that if Rocco is in my pod, and Tony on Rocco is a very scary opponent. And I played against him Punt City, and I was like, I knew how he was able to sort of just like pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. So having that turn 1, or it might have been turn 2, but the first 2 turns I had a Grafdigger's Cage out, and Rocco gets absolutely peed by a Grafdigger's Cage.
It has to find a braid.
Yeah.
And that's about all they got. Yeah.
And which was wild because at one point during that match, Tony did go to a braid my Grafdigger's Cage, but before he like tapped his mana, we were like, hey, Tony, they're casting a wheel when they have a Notion Thief in board. I know you don't want the Grafdigger's Cage in here, but we also lose the game if you target my Grafdigger's Cage. He was like, yeah, that's a good point. So that was kind of a wild interaction. Yeah, for sure. Oh, man. That was a card that, like, I know people love Notion Thief, but for some reason it, like, showed up a lot more this weekend. And it just, like, reminded me of, like, oh, yeah, this card's busted. Like, especially when there's all these like turbo decks running around, it's like, yeah, blue farm, go, yeah, Rog Silas, go wheel into my Notion Thief, I dare you, dog. Like
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, damn.
Yeah, but yeah, it was definitely a solid game, a little bit back and forth, a lot of people being forced to answer stuff at the right time. I definitely, like, being on the play had a good amount of momentum going onto my side because people were doing this, like, you have to answer me right now thing. And I was like, I got a bunch of counter spells. Yeah, I'll answer you, bud. Like,
I'll pass to a shiny.
Yeah. Never. Oh my god. I love Ashani so much. When we get in pods together, it turns into the most like I don't know. It's a weird, like, I told you so thing all the time. Sorry, this is a super bad tangent. we never play well against each other. It's so funny. But anyways, back to the finals. So then the finals happened, and the finals were really interesting. So we had like a stacks piece from me right away. Gustav had a insane start, basically very obviously holding up turn one opposition agent. I had turn one Dranith, I think it was. I want to say it was Dranith. Yeah,
that sounds correct.
And then Armix Crom had turn one Douthie, and Rog Silas went to Necro for 20 into a Douthie Voidwalker, to which I said, yeah, you sure about that, bud? And Mitch said, I believe his exact words were, "Ah, fuck it," which didn't feel great as the control deck at the table to hear your opponent saying, "Ah, fuck it." And I was like, thank God for this Dranith, or else this game would have been done.
Mitch is a big proponent of casting your cards, so
yeah. And, like, he got to the top 4 by doing it. I'm not gonna yuck his yum, right? But like, it was, yeah, for me, Mister. Like, yeah, I'll pay into your heuristic study for every spell this turn, as opposed to him being like, Necro for 20! All these cards are for you! Don't get me wrong, I play Rog Silas, but I think I'm the person who plays Rog Silas most like a mid-range deck.
Yeah, you're like, all right, I'm gonna cast Silas so I can get my Soul Ring out of my graveyard.
Yeah. You're like, what? It's a Death Touch blocker? Come at me, nerds. But yeah, so it started off on that insane note, but then Armix Crom was able to wheel after the Necropotence dig, so like all that work sculpting just absolutely went away. So Mitch ended up paying like 20 life for literally nothing. And
unfortunate.
Yeah, and his only land was like a Phyrexia Tower. So like it was definitely I would describe it as a ballsy turn one play for sure. Going last, sacrificing your Rogrek to a Phyrexian Tower and sacking your Lotus Petal to Necro for 20 into a Douthie, I would definitely describe as a ballsy play. I would not have personally gone that deep. But he got immediately turbo punished. I think it was Time Twister that resolved after that too. So like all of the graveyard stuff got wiped away too, and it was rough. And then so he was kind of out of the game, but like Gustav was like farming off him pretty hard for a while. No, it couldn't have been Dranith from me turn one, because Gustav played as Timna on turn 2 after he played opposition agent. So I played some stacks piece. I don't remember what it was. Might have been Esper Sentinel and hold the mana up for the counterspell. I think that might have been it. So that was like the dynamic, was like Gustav was just feeding off Rog Silas, who basically was doing nothing. And then we were all like chipping away at Rogsai. And then the game turned into this like sort of mid-range stacks matchup where like Gustav couldn't go off because there was graveyard hate going on. They were pretty proactively like, well, I think the thing stopping me from popping off was Armix Crom dropped a Notion Thief. So then like all of my card advantage kind of just halted pretty aggressively. And we were like, okay, how do we deal with this Notion Thief? And then a Narset came down. It turned into this whole grind fest. So it was a very, very grindy pod. I really heavily suggest, if you get a chance to watch that pod, you should. First of all, Mike and Drake do a fantastic job of being the commentators there. It's very lively, very entertaining the whole time. The game is super grindy, super diverse decks, right? Like you see Armix Crom and you see Rog Silas around, but like Tivit, obviously I'm getting a lot of comments from people being like, Tivit, what? And then, Goose's Halana Timna deck was a deck that people like talked about when Halana was first spoiled, but kind of like forgot about. And this is his second top 4 with that deck. And also, major shout out to Gustav, because like, had he won that finals pod, he would have been the player who was undefeated for the whole tournament with the exact same record that I'm, happy about at this end, right? He still went 4 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws for the day, which is still an insane record, especially in a 4-player format. That's an insane record. So yeah, I mean, seriously, he put in a ton of work, and had he not, had he been a person who had a little less truth to his word, he would have won that finals match, because he could have, instead of upholding the agreement we came to, he could have attacked a different creature and then comboed off. Had he attacked the Douthie Voidwalker instead of the Phantasmal Imager Notion Thief, which is the thing we discussed. I was like, hey, look, I'm not going to block with my Dranith if you're just going to win the game. And he was like, I'm not going to win the game. I was like, okay.
And they held to it.
And he held to it, and then I won the game. So,
Entirely unrelated. Would you lie for a time twister?
That's so tough. Yeah.
Anyways, we'll leave that in the Twitter past.
Oh, what's this? I'm just getting a text. Twitter is on fire. Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah,
I wonder what happened.
Yes, if you do want to watch those finals games, everybody, the VODs still should be on our Twitch account for the foreseeable future. And we are also working on chopping up and putting onto YouTube both the semifinals coverage and the finals coverage. So probably not by the time this comes out, because this is coming out very soon after we record this. But in the near future, we are hoping to have all of that up on the good old Playing with Power MTG YouTube channel. And now, Ian, we are running out of time because Cal's Playing with Power podcast runs to about 50 minutes rather than Ryan's Playing with Power podcast, which ran for about 2 hours. Is there anything you would like to add before we go? Anything about you? Anything about Tivit? Anything about the tournament? Any inspirational advice for aspiring CEDH grinders out there?
Sure. So this one I'm feeling pretty good about is that the methodology and the thought processes that went behind this Tivit deck are very contradictive to a lot of things that are being said about how to optimize CEDH right now. The whole point of this deck is to play a lot of like very impactful asymmetrical stacks pieces early in the game, and then use the fact that you're still playing blue to hold up counter spells to protect those stacks pieces, and eventually use your value engine, the command zone, to turn the corner in the game. Where a lot of people are saying, no, you have to play these low card quality cards that let you win as soon as possible. Or you have to play this like hard stacks thing and lock down the board completely. Or you have to play, certain color combinations. Like I think green is like actually in the worst position of any color in CEDH right now, which I think is probably a hot take. But it's just thinking about things like that where I am constantly challenging stuff. And I'm not saying that to say challenge things for the sake of challenging things. But if you put in the work, if you put in your 10,000 hours and you put in the effort of really testing your theories and seeing what comes from them, like taking literal results from the things you're seeing, they do pay off, right? Like the fact that Winota exists right now is because I ignored the people who said you're playing Boros, you shouldn't be playing this in a CEDH server right now. And now it's considered one of the top 5 decks in the format. Stuff like that. Like, so feel free to, if you have a logical backing for your choices, try stuff. Experiment, try new things. This is one of the reasons I love CEDH, is because as a brewer, it's a paradise. You can do all sorts of crazy things, and you still get to do the broken stuff where you like cast 30 mana rocks and do some absolutely nuts things. There are people who I've met at local events who never have a social media presence, who never go to these online tournaments, who have said some of the most insightful things about CEDH that I've ever heard. And I'm like, and no one will ever hear these people's opinions except for me. So I am always willing to challenge perspectives, and I'm always willing to challenge traditions. Now, when you're just joining the format, please don't be that guy. That guy, TM, non-gendered version of that guy. But don't be that person, right? Don't be the person who comes in and says, I know everything about everything. But if you've been playing the format for a while, try stuff, see if it works. Don't be in denial if it doesn't work. Your combo doesn't have to work. Your deck doesn't have to work. There are many commanders who I'm like, I love this card. I would get a tattoo of this card on my body. I will not play it in a CEDH tournament because I have that respect for it. Like a Grand Arbiter, one of my favorite cards of all time. Probably will never bring it to a CEDH tournament, despite having, I think, every different version of that card ever printed.
Excellent. Thank you for all of that insight, Ian. It was a wonderful pleasure to have you. Do you have anything to plug on your way out the door?
Yeah, everybody. So feel free to check out youtube.com/ComedIanMTG if you want to hear insights like this. As I mentioned, probably the largest tournament-specific CEDH channel there is, or EDH channel there is. I love playing these events. I love traveling to these events. I love just being in the tournament scene and being a part of the Magic scene. It's so much fun, and I'm always trying new stuff. I'm always experimenting with new decks, and I post that stuff on the channel all the time. I talk about this stuff in my Discord. I highly suggest you also follow me on Twitter, because I have been doing something I'm really proud of lately, where I do quick Twitter recaps of every round I play in a tournament, and they've been really, really fun to do. I'll like post a picture of my commander, and then I'll do a little blurb about how the round went, and I'll include like pictures of, cards that were really relevant to the match. So if I'm like, oh, Underworld Breach got countered by blah 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 blah, like I'll post pictures of Breach and the other card, stuff like that. So if you're interested in like getting those tournament recaps, hearing about the stuff as it's happening, feel free to check me out there. And yeah, youtube.com/ComedIan MTG if you want to find out more.
Well, that was our time with Ian. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. Maybe give a CEDH tournament a shot. If you like playing CEDH, you might like playing tournament CEDH. Definitely is a little bit of a different environment, as Ian alluded to and I've alluded to in the past. But it might just be the environment for you. Put a little stakes into your CEDH, and maybe you find out you enjoy it even more. I want to give a big thanks again to our sponsor, TC's Rockets, and make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast aggregator. You'd be surprised how much it helps. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and more. I'm continually expanding the reach of Playing with Power throughout social media so that I can take over the world. So you can find all those links and more in the episode notes. That wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Want even more CEDH content? Commander's Herald has got you covered. It's the best resource for CEDH articles out there, written by experts, including Playing with Power's own Drake Sasser. Check out the latest Phyrexia All Will Be One set reviews now. Go to commandersherald.com today to read more.